I need to wrap this season up. So here I go with that, looking at the mixed blessing, the double-hilted sword it is to be raised in a fairly controlling fundamentalist Christian home and church community. What are those who grow up that way left with?
Having a Christian upbringing is a blessing.
Culture gives us something to stand on. It helps us know who we are. A Christian upbringing gives us a head start by having us grow up with Christian values, a relationship with God, and even a knowledge of the Bible, maybe.
Here's the thing. I'm well into middle age, and so I guess I can tell you what I think my fundamentalist upbringing has left me with. Naturally, what I've made of it is all on me, but it's definitely true that the richness of the soil into which you were sown to begin with has an effect on who and what you eventually grow into. Let's start out with the good stuff. As church kids, we were set the weekly task of memorizing ever more challenging portions of the King James Bible right from the age when we were learning to talk and could not yet read, and we did this up to our teenage years. This meant that when we eventually may have had to study Shakespeare at school, or read anything Victorian, or take law class, or read things that were formal, or read or watch anything from the 20th century that has biblical references like David and Goliath, or the wisdom of Solomon, or the betrayal of Judas, or Moses parting the Red Sea, or the serpent enticing Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. This was all extremely familiar to us from a very young age. It wasn't hard at all. We grew up with it. It was like we'd always known about all of these things. And I don't take any of that lightly. Novels, plays, movies, TV, and songs written as recently as the late 20th century tend to assume readers are casually familiar with a whole bunch of biblical references that are now largely gone. I remember becoming a teacher and leaving an episode of Knight Rider for my not terribly literate class of grade 10s to do written work about when I was going to be away one day, and finding that the whole situation where Kit, the talking AI car, has to fight a giant indestructible truck called Goliath with various references to David and Goliath, David Hasselhoff the least of that, this TV show was entirely indecipherable to the kids, not the indestructible talking AI car that they could deal with. It was the various references to Kit being like David, fighting the giant Goliath that they had never heard of. Hearing them say they didn't know what even was Goliath was so weird for me, but I learned that lesson. It was just as weird as going to provincial championships with a school trivia team and watching two teams of incredibly smart teens, both from Catholic high schools nonetheless, fail to correctly guess whether a single one of figures like Moses, Peter, or Jesus belonged in the Old or New Testament of the Bible, with them asking, "What even are testaments?" And I remember supervising students at Remembrance Day ceremonies on November 11th and realizing, you have never had to shut up, sit still, not wear your hat, and not laugh and roughhouse and goof off for any length of time. You never did church, and you literally can't be solemn on command for half an hour at a time like we all could when we were 8. Or maybe they did contemporary ADHD church and wore their hats, laughed, roughhoused, and goofed off and were drowned out by their worship team's amps anyway. That's the opposite extreme. Knowing how and when to be serious, quiet, and still, knowing how to hide one's emotional reactions behind a solemn face, those skills are often very useful in adult life, especially when asked to be professional in some meaning of that word. And we grew up with the assumption that there were shoulds, that purpose was a thing. God didn't, for example, put cats and flies and dogs and birds everywhere so you'd have something to torture. The idea that forgiveness was, or should be, a thing. We grew up with that. That learning, growing, repenting, recognizing when you messed up, and making necessary changes was an essential part of being a grown-up, of being a good person, certainly. That truth was vital. That it wasn't mainly up to us to create a fog of let's pretend to live in, or find one on the internet. That we don't have our own private truth or reality. That whatever God made us, we just are, with the idea that we are to grow, learn, mature, and develop into the ripened version of whatever that was, rather than a stunted, shriveled, rotten, dysfunctional one that just doesn't work. All that is really good stuff to grow up with, and not everyone grows up with any of that anymore. As to the less ideal side of things in my upbringing, go with me on this one. I've never been an addict, but I know a few things about addictions programs from reading about them and talking to people. Bill Wilson and Bob Smith founded Alcoholics Anonymous in Akron, Ohio in 1935. There are a whole bunch of these organizations nowadays. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, that kind of thing. They're normally called 12-step programs, and whether it's alcohol, narcotics, gambling, or porn, they're all based on the same basic strategies. In fact, they're based on exactly the kind of upbringing that I had. Good, decent, church-going, old-school Christian lifestyle stuff, because that's what Wilson and Smith grew up with, and they believed in its benefits. Russell Brand wrote a whole book based around applying these 12 steps, this structure, to regular lives, not that he's ever really lived one. He was a manic thrill seeker with zero impulse control for most of his life until middle age. I teach kids like that every day. The actual success rates of these 12-step programs are less than encouraging, by the way, but we don't have a whole lot else. These programs are all based around structure, routine, and accountability. Structure, in the sense that your day, your week, your life needs to follow various schedules and limits and things that are someone else's idea for everyone to schedule their week and make their daily choices within. Hence the word routine, which I'm guessing comes from the French word for wheel, path, road, or track, something you go around and around on, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. Bearing left at the dead oak tree, going along beside the river, then over the bridge before turning into the lane, and you're home. Just like yesterday. Same thing you'll do tomorrow. Something predictable and controlled and defined by someone else. You go around and around on it. It repeats over and over, again and again, like me right now. It's not terribly interesting, but it's terribly predictable and organized and kind of comforting. You adhere to a bunch of often arbitrary-seeming limits and prohibitions that most regular people don't have to worry about to keep you on the straight and narrow. And if you slip up, there is accountability. Accountability in the sense that you learn that you are letting yourself down if you don't live your life, your day, your evenings in a way that fits inside that structure, those limits, and follows the routines. And there are also going to be unhappy other people you've let down that you now have to face before moving forward with your life. So there's accountability to yourself and to those who are closest to you, usually with a sponsor, partner, pastor, mentor, coach, or whatever being your main anchor point of accountability. Obviously, if your problem is that, like Russell Brand and the more feral of my students, your life up until now has entirely lacked limits, structure, and accountability in particular, there's absolutely nothing you need more than upping those in your week just a little bit. Maybe even having someone else do it for you and making you stick to it when you have other thoughts about the matter. Might be really helpful. As a temporary measure, certainly. But if you grew up with an excessive, unhealthy amount of all of that stuff every single day of your life, nothing but structure and limits and rules, maybe not so much. Maybe that's not something that you need to artificially introduce more of. In the 90s, my sister worked at a teen addictions home in our area. 14 beds, 8 male, 8 female residents. It was primarily for teens from the inner city who grew up with no one keeping tabs on them at all, or who conversely had run away to escape hypervigilant, micromanaging parents, and then they'd gone too far in the other direction, living lives too wild by half. The idea was to have them live under extremely close professional supervision 24/7, like kid jail, in a wholesome summer camp-like facility in the middle of scenic nowhere, which is all there mostly is around here. This effectively cut them off from their drug contacts and social circle with its routines of using whatever it was, often OxyContin and or alcohol, as well as access to these things and the temptation to commit crimes to get them. Raised like we were, my sister was struck by the similarities between the lives of these teen addicts in rehab and ours in a fundamentalist church so strict we weren't allowed to call it a church or celebrate Christmas. Spending too much time alone, in either setting, was viewed by most people with a bit of suspicion. What were you doing? No one got to bed after dark unless you lived in the middle of nowhere like I did. No going uptown after dark, I mean. But at the rehab facility, like where I grew up too, town was a fair drive away. And fun was supervised and sanitized. This was all shortly before the internet was much of a thing, so kids were showing up at the facility, having their personal belongings gone through by authority figures who confiscated Jimi Hendrix t-shirts, Pearl Jam, Cypress Hill or Nirvana CDs, Guns N' Roses wallets or belts, Pink Floyd's The Wall videotapes, Delicate Sound of Thunder or Use Your Illusion concert footage, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine movie, or whatever. Anything that was felt to have an association with, a bridge to, a connection to people using drugs. If it was something the organizers thought was connected to, or something someone might conceivably enjoy while doing drugs, then it was confiscated for the duration of these teens' 6-month stay. My sister and I thought about how these young teens had demonstrably screwed up their lives. They had stolen pharmaceuticals, often starting with stuff from their parents' and grandparents' and friends' parents' medicine cabinets, maybe stolen money from their parents' wallets to buy drugs from people they knew who had them, in some cases shoplifted and stolen valuables to resell to buy drugs, in some cases really reaching rock bottom when they tried to quit, could not, and found themselves in sex work or breaking into homes to steal wrapped Christmas presents to open up, fence, or pawn and buy drugs with the proceeds. It had become so obvious that despite approaching adulthood, they were not in control of their lives and were living well outside societal norms and perhaps the law. So much so that it was decided they would go to juvie and or a rehab program like this one. They'd screwed up, and they knew now that they couldn't be trusted with what most of us would consider normal adolescent freedoms, entertainments, social interactions, self-expression, and lifestyles, and had to give that over to policing adult figures to microparent every tiny bit of their day, though they were far too old for this to normally be appropriate. My sister and I really related. We'd never screwed up or done much of anything at all very much as teens, but from birth it had been assumed and drummed into us all that we were users, addicts, sinners. We had sinned and would continue sinning, and so needed to turn our lives over to a higher power in the form of the church, God. Because at our church, there were no healthy, normal people, we were taught. We were all sinners. And adult figures would be going through our stuff, even if we were 16, 18, 22 years old, confiscating or pressuring us to toss our Pink Floyd t-shirts, AC/DC, Metallica, Pearl Jam, or Nirvana, or really any dance or rap CDs, Guns N' Roses, Rolling Stones, The Who, Coolio, Two Live Crew, or Ice-T wallets, jackets, pins, or belts, Pink Floyd's The Wall movie, Delicate Sound of Thunder, or Use Your Illusion concert footage, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine movie, or whatever. Blue Oyster Cult? Really? 9-Inch Nails? That meant penises. Pearl Jam? That meant semen. Nirvana? That was Buddhist. And that smiling face was definitely purposely drawn to look high. It all got questioned. Anything that was felt to have an association with, a bridge to, a connection to people partying, drinking, dancing, having sex, and so on. All of it had to go if you yourself weren't actually going to, and you certainly weren't getting it back after 6 months. The limits, for us, were about no partying or entertainment, and nothing associated with partying or entertainment. No movies or television, rap, pop, or rock music in many homes. Not the serious ones, anyway. The routine for us was about church services and events, called meetings, happening pretty much every second day or more often than that each week, and mandatory involvement in a host of family events often. It did not involve very much hanging out with people our age who were not relatives and or part of our church at all each week. The accountability for us was to our relatives and every single person at our church who, in a town the size of ours, heard all sorts of rumors about someone seeing us going into the video rental store or the pool hall or arcade, or being seen buying Maxim, FHM, or Stuff magazine at the corner store, a cigar, or a six-pack of Molson Golden. The teens in the rehab facility had frequent group sessions as well, which involved sitting in a circle and talking about how hard it was not to use, and about various notable times they had used. My sister and I related in terms of youth groups that did basically that same thing, only with sinning instead of using. Well, actually not even sinning, just not living the lifestyle. We didn't just have to follow the Bible. It certainly wasn't just about not breaking any of the endless rules, though it certainly started with that. It was mainly about visibly following, performing, I'd say, what was seen as a Christian lifestyle, and never being seen to, or being thought to have, deviated from the appearance of it in any way. If we did, we were accountable to everyone about how things looked, to anyone who felt like questioning our choices. So church teens would share about how they used to have rock or boy band posters all over their bedrooms, but that they'd been exercised about this and had burned them all, and now felt so much better. Maybe had a small, neat and tidy Bible verse up where NSYNC or EXIL used to be. With my friend Curry, oddly smitten by secondhand brethren feelings of guilt, he tossed thousands of dollars of Dungeons and Dragons stuff in his entire comic book collection into a dumpster.
It crushed the black like discotheque, pool hall, and arcade. It stepped on 14 cinemas and a corner comic store. It smashed a video rental place in my friend Curry's weekly D&D. It rampaged for a week and it seemed to want some more. It was a giant killing conscience. It was not of this world. When the thing attacked, there was no safe place to hide. When no one was looking, you got out and went to war. And shoot up little children, ate the brains and their insides.
For the addicted teens my sister worked with, this tightly controlled rehab environment resulted in kids becoming smugglers of contraband, just like in jail. Someone always had something, like an MP3 player with unimproved music on it, or half a fifth of vodka, or a knife, or a Ziploc bag of who knows what ADHD pills and a couple of codeines or a joint. Just like any church we've been in that controls the teens as much as that rehab center, we had those guys too. Marilyn Manson was that guy at high school when he was Brian Warner. He could be counted upon to buy and resell to kids forbidden heavy metal CDs if they were from sheltered homes like his Mormon one. The hope at my sister's job was that a 6-month stint in that facility would do the trick, and these young kids would be free to go into regular human society, often having internalized some of the limits, the routines, the structure, and connections to people who would hold them accountable. It wasn't like that for us. For us, that tight control was going to be our entire lives, just as it had been since our birth. There was no end to the meetings, the program, the routines in sight. Death, for us, was getting out of the facility for the first time. And maybe, after death, there would be some kind of heavenly party. Maybe the eternal singing of hymns in heaven would sound better than our unaccompanied lackluster singing at church all week long. Didn't sound like much fun, though. Not very heavenly at all. Teens who leave a rehab facility or program early often find that they simply aren't ready to deal with the real world. They get right back into crime and using and neglect their health and safety. They get into sex work, get pregnant, or get girls pregnant, and all of that stuff. The Plymouth Brethren Christian Church is the strictest Plymouth Brethren group I know about. And when their members leave, often when they are still young, they have far more of these exact same problems than you'd think, especially addictions and pregnancy. Doesn't help that, just like in the programs, all predictors as to their future lives if they leave the Brethren group have been that they certainly will not be able to handle things. That them taking the reins to their own lives will end in them ruining their lives spectacularly. Everyone they knew told them that. Step 1 in church and Al-Anon is to admit that you are helpless to deal with your life and need Al-Anon, the church, God, to not use, sin, get pregnant, or generally screw up. If adults leave or get kicked out of a Christian group like we grew up in, it's like you left rehab, left Sinners Anonymous, left the facility prematurely. You haven't died yet, so it's premature to leave it. Nothing good is now predicted for you. And the gloom and doom prediction of life shipwreck is not only self-fulfilling, especially if you kind of believe them and want to escape the obsessive control mechanisms anyway, willing to be foolish and wrong so long as you get to be free, but it's also true that kids who are raised in Sinners Anonymous settings like mine aren't really prepared to handle a beer, an edible, a concert, a dance club, a date, so we often screw it up in any number of ways. If we somehow manage to have a great time the first time we rebel and try one of these, or all of them at the same time, That itself is a victory of sorts. It almost never happens. We get told that there's no such thing as not overdoing it, and so we do. But some of us did this rebellion more carefully and much more slowly than most of those of our cohort, and came out the other side with our new freedoms, living more or less normal lives. That's comparatively few of us, actually. Many went way too far and struggled deeply with addiction and the law, and some of them lost their lives. Others simply lost their nerve and backslid right back into Brotherism somewhere around age 30. So that's part of the legacy that we're used to. Getting used to, and maybe even needing, all of these routines. Needlessly repetitive, ritualistic weekly and monthly schedules for some of us. Needing that structure. Needing a bunch of people to be accountable to, which need can make you a magnet for interfering, controlling personalities. Maybe ending up with zero tolerance for anyone, be it a credit card company, environmental activist, Jehovah's Witness, radical feminist, or guest speaker at work preaching at you. Maybe some of us have way less patience with that than most other people do. Maybe some of us even have a strong urge to argue with them just about as soon as they start in, which they often do, with a big smile, just like they aren't pissing you right off with their sermon. A lot of church folk go to a whole lot of trouble to set up worship performances, and they genuinely don't understand why I really don't enjoy their efforts. Unless, maybe that it's that I hate Jesus? Must be. But Phil's daughter Tracy says, if someone poked me in the eye every morning, noon, and night for 40 plus years with a rose, how do you think I'd react to receiving a bouquet of flowers? So there's that. Part of what I would say an upbringing like mine leaves many of us with is getting all too used to things normal people maybe aren't used to at all. Besides getting used to the expectation that one follow the church schedule and routines, experiencing various odd things as normal. Things like getting judged all the time for almost anything, feeling the need to reflexively try to justify anything anyone questions without thinking, because you grew up continually being asked to explain yourself about anything by anyone at any time, especially any stuff about fun. Many of us find that because of how we grew up, we end up as adults who have no normal expectation that having fun is a proper goal for today or any day, really. So things that are supposed to be fun might be hard for us to react normally to. We may have discomfort with being seen by others laughing and smiling hugely, clearly having overmuch pleasure. One of the sad facts about addiction is you can get right into it without really having much fun, even to start with, finding you just need cigarettes, vodka, and pills to feel normal, but little or no fun. But for many people, when they want something fun, the decision is, I want that. Is there anything to worry about? Any reason I shouldn't have it? But for many of us, with the kind of upbringing I had, our knee-jerk response to a whole range of fun that would normally be approached like this is flipped. Instead, we wonder, is there any good reason why I should have this? How could I justify this? How would this look? Do I really want this? Am I really the kind of person who wants things like this? Wouldn't it be better if I just didn't enjoy this? In fact, if I don't pay attention, I find that in the course of a day or a week nowadays, I find I have thoughtlessly said no purely out of reflex to a large number of things others are saying yes to for small pleasures. Right down to coffee and tea. Just no. Cigarettes, gum, whatever. No. It's how I'm made, to unthinkingly try to eliminate joy and pleasure from my day. Is the thing really necessary? Do I really need that? I also find I'm absolutely not the only person who grew up like me who ends up with a fairly blank, non-committal or severe face, flat voice, and non-committal body language. This can simply be one's nature, but can also be fostered by a culture that requires one to sit impassive, still, and silent for much of one's childhood. One where we were judged largely based on how we reacted emotionally to things, if at all. These were shibboleths, membership tests. It was so wonderful to be gathered to the name of the Lord Jesus Christ on Sunday, rather than going to a man-made church of our choice, wasn't it? Those Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles certainly seemed to be a way of getting kids into Eastern mysticism and the occult, didn't they? The Force in the Star Wars movies was clearly the force of the devil, And the beast in the movie Krull was certainly the Roman beast of the apocalypse, wasn't he? Rock music was published in a transparent attempt to get kids to literally sell their souls to the devil, wasn't it? You didn't like that stuff, did you? Any of that stuff? You weren't interested in and entertained by that sort of stuff, were you? Oh, you aren't? Oh, good. Of course not. Me neither. People I know who come from Russia or virtually any Asian country often show this hidden emotions facial thing, for much the same reason. The passivity seems to be endemic. Any culture where you might be judged based on your emotional responses to anything tends to foster hiding those emotional responses. The flip side of this judging thing, of course, is that we grew up in a climate where it was normal for all of us to question and doubt and possibly criticize anyone at any time, so long as we never applied that kind of thinking to the whole church itself or to anyone in high status positions in it. So many of us grow up with a knee-jerk habit of doing that everywhere we go, judging, questioning, criticizing, much more than regular folks do. Wonderful, isn't it? It's charming. And sometimes we find there's an odd kind of passivity to us, when we're not criticizing, directly or by implication, of course, just mutely accepting or being defensive over being gratuitously criticized and questioned all of the time, because we'd been trained to internally panic over, but silently accept, criticism, at any time, from anyone, for anything, at all. Never thinking to ignore, laugh at, or flatly reject accusations and judgments lobbed at us. So there's that. People raised like me have chosen different approaches to their Sunday mornings nowadays. As you may know, I hold the odd view that belief in God is not a choice. So I don't find that people who had a deeply unpleasant or even traumatic experience of controlling Christian upbringing are any more or less likely to embrace atheism. I think they go that way if they were going that way regardless. It's not like if your parents treated you badly or people told you lies about them, this increased your likelihood of believing your parents somehow didn't exist. And it's like that with God too. It's more a question of, all questions of choice aside, what kind of God you find that you believe in. As to people who retain a belief that there is a God, some people, like me, struggle to spend a single hour more in any church setting at all after their childhood experiences with all of that. Our problems are with church services, not with the Almighty. Many people like my sister claim to actually suffer triggers to their clinically diagnosed PTSD when they try to sit in a church service. And I've heard them talk about it so much that when I first heard people talking about CPTSD, I quite wrongly assumed that it would stand for Church Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder rather than Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Shell shock, battle fatigue, and eventually PTSD used to be primarily terms applied by therapists to men who'd served in the military and experienced horrific things in time of war. Their buddy getting his head blown off a couple of feet away from them, and so on. Dead children. POWs surviving torture. Nowadays, of course, according to the stats anyway, these terms are almost solely something decidedly non-military women self-diagnose on the internet along with ADHD and being neurospicy. And once they've self-diagnosed, the symptoms start to be all they want to talk about. They're not flaky emotional children anymore who can't be relied upon or held accountable for much of anything. No, they're victims who get constant special considerations and accommodations. Wait, was I judging and criticizing a whole bunch of people without even thinking? Maybe. Anyway, an unpopular opinion. If a large number of pretty functional people are self-diagnosing with things professionals see on a daily basis in a much more clinical light, this kind of diminishes how seriously anyone is going to be able to take the thing in question. If everyone's a victim, then no one's really a victim, right? Pretty much every kid I teach is going to claim to have ADHD to some degree, but once you've taught the real thing, it's on a whole different level in terms of impact on quality of life and ability to connect with and work with others or at all. Some people raised like me do find a church they can stomach and embrace something refreshingly different from our group, finding extremely permissive, anyone goes, anything goes, contemporary worship emotions-led stuff. Some go in the other direction and find something refreshingly different from our group and having traditions, vestments, Latin, candles, stained glass, and so on, where ours did have the dusty solemnity, only boringly executed and without the pretty costumes and decor. Some Brethren people find themselves really appreciating Catholic Mass or similar in the form of Anglican services or that kind of thing. I'm never surprised to hear people I grew up with telling me, as if it's unprecedented, that they are actually really enjoying a Pentecostal or Catholic church despite what we were told about those organizations and the goings-on there growing up. Sometimes it's a Quaker group who have a lot of things, stretches of silent praying and meditation time, that are reassuring and familiar to ex-Brethren people. That's a whole thing. As for me, I've always wanted to know what God actually wants in terms of Sunday morning, but I've never felt like I have any idea.
Went to a church filled with weeping heads to youngsters, selfieing teens, singing songs about them singing. Yeah, singing songs about liking singing songs. That's what they did, and I wasn't feeling that. But do you like it all, or the things you are more fond of? Can we reach a point where we're singing to ourselves about how we feel, live and believe, but leave you out almost entirely? I don't know what you like. No, I don't know what you like. 'Cause we've got songs about sweat, blood, and pain, debasing death, and about our sin and shame. And we've got songs about how awesome we are feeling to gladly surrender our sweet, special lives.
I think I'm definitely left with the vestiges of various superstitions to get over. My Christianity, my faith, and I myself are not spiritual if I'm merely being superstitious about things. This isn't a horror movie. The world isn't a mainly good place with evil forces stashed away somewhere waiting for our permission to mess with this person or that because a person does some kind of summoning magic or dabbles in something like heavy metal music. This world is a place that was made on purpose, and the people and things in it too. And I guess it's about being a good and successful, maybe excellent even, whatever you were made to be, and not let anything or anyone rot or erode what you were meant to be. But entropy is ever with us, as well as various agents of erosion, rot, confusion, hedonism, superficiality, and deceit. I guess instead of excelling and thriving, some people will instead air their grievances, saying they never got to be this or that comfortable, respected, successful, or good, whatever it is, and maybe blame and resent others. And people and things certainly aren't what they should or could be all the time. But still, who are you being? A resentful person? The world's got enough of those. Stiff competition in that field, to be sure. And dyeing one's hair green or pink, and maybe getting some variation on a mohawk, and having a nose piercing, not necessarily with a safety pin, seems to be the outfit du jour en vogue for people motivated by resentment. Every communist revolution ever was mainly fueled by resentment. Read about a few of them. I've been exploring the music and lives of the Beatles for a couple of years now, and my thoughts for this concluding episode include the idea that there isn't right talent and wrong talent, or even good talent and bad talent. I was raised with the superstitious idea that if someone said or did something wrong, then their movie or song or whatever was also wrong, and it was wrong to watch or listen to it, and very damning evidence of our own wrong if we claimed we recognized God-given talent in anyone who was associated with the wrong thing, and even more so if we enjoyed it at all. So much of our superstition is our own embarrassing imaginations. For centuries, It's been like the best creative minds given to us have delighted in imagining demonic female spirits so seductive and sexual that God, who invented women and sex alike, could never have come up with those. Songs and stories so dark and mysterious and fascinating that, again, God could never have come up with those. But this doesn't make sense to me. When there is beauty, inspiration, connection, and sincere seeking after truth in a thing, that seems to me like it's coming from God, even if it goes very off the rails in terms of how it's used and where it ends up. So, a Swedish death metal band who burned down a church don't get bewitching headbanging riffs and mesmerizing drum fills from Satan whether or not the end result serves him. God gives, and afterward everyone sees what we've then gone and done with it. And a lot of the time, I think it's worse to simply never do anything with what you've got than to try and fail, or try and get a bunch of it wrong, or win the praise of a primarily vapid, silly audience. So, John Lennon was undeniably a talented musician, singer, and songwriter. To anyone who believes in God, it makes sense to name God as the source of his talent, just as God is the source of all talent, to recognize that the Satan of the Bible is not depicted in there as being in hell right now at all, let alone down there writing cool serpentine blues riffs on his electric guitar and selling them to talentless guitarists up here at the price of their soul. This is not in the Bible, and that seems important. Beelzebub's just not depicted in the Bible as being the best fiddle player ever, competing with the best fiddlers in the state of Georgia. That's silly songs, books, and plays, movies, and TV. We came up with that. So, John Lennon writes songs that stick in your head and make you feel them. That's most of the magic of music right there, the thing we are all trying, and most of us failing, to do. And in our cultural consciousness, John Lennon, dressed all in white, sings at his white piano, looking positively messianic that he doesn't believe in Jesus, and that God is only a concept. Well, what I hear when I listen to each of those John Lennon songs isn't a song from the devil, an evil song, a wrong song with wrong thinking, one to ban and forbid Christian kids listening to. I hear a flawed, talented, passionate, funny, angry, sincere, cynical personality who is, if that's what matters to you, maybe wrong about God and a few things. Doesn't make it a bad song. Doesn't mean God gave John Lennon no genuine talent. Doesn't mean John Lennon played the wrong chords in the wrong order wrongly. And it doesn't mean that the song is evil either and something to censor. This is a man trying to work things out. A man raised Anglican who tried marriage and drugs and Indian mysticism and transcendental meditation and Hare Krishna and is now trying to find himself in his life with another woman and their son. A man who is telling us honestly and poignantly that he really tried, but he hasn't been able to make any of that other stuff work for him any more than he is able to make the Beatles work for him anymore. But he hasn't given up trying and trying to work things out. And to me, that's beautiful. A man telling the truth about his life. I would no more tell Christian kids to avoid listening to John Lennon's wrestlings with life and love and fame and God than I would tell them to never read the Psalms, because we think King David wrote some of those. And he did that whole thing with Bathsheba, didn't he? And was therefore wrong. And Christian faith just isn't about keeping all dissenting thoughts and opinions out of your head. If a random atheist on YouTube is able to knock down your religious beliefs with one video, then good. If your beliefs can't stand up to that, then I regret to inform you that they are not worth anything at all and we're going to fall down anyway. And these things so often go in a direction their creators would never have intended. Talking about God as a concept, a being, a force, a source of creativity, and weighing whether this idea is real and if we feel it and what we think and feel about the possibility that maybe evolution or random change is the source of human creative expression, I think that's all good, and as likely as anything else is to end up, finally, in a good place after a bunch of thinking. I didn't know the word deconstruction in my late teens, but I decided that if the God our whole week revolved around church events in the service of was no more than a cardboard cutout standee thing that couldn't stand up if a breeze hit it, then I wanted to know that. And if God was real and didn't deal a whole terrible lot with me in my life, then I wanted to know that. And if God was real and primarily wanted me to go around preaching the brethren understanding of the gospel message to people everywhere, I wanted to know that. And if, when I was done my own mundane little creative things, I was being like my Father, my Creator, my God, then I wanted to know that. The Bible presents the idea that God will burn what is merely transient and keep or save what is lasting, separating sheep from goats, wheat from chaff, and refining metals like gold or brass by heating them and skimming the dross, the impurities, off the top. And I don't think that's just an afterlife thing. I think it's a life thing, a now thing, an ongoing thing. And I think we can get involved. We can, as to spirits, for example, test any social movement and look for signs that its foundation is jealousy, resentment, and spite of, for example, people who seem to have easier or better lives than we do, and we can choose to try to outlive them, both in terms of quantity and quality of years, rather than plot about overthrowing them or waste the rest of our lives in failing to decentralize, denormalize, interrogate, decolonize, and struggle session them to death. Maybe they are wrong about something and did some wrong things, so we should live better, do better than them, not blow the whistle on their wrongness and try to get them canceled. We're players, not the referee, so we need to compete at life. Maybe society says we're pathetic or failing or wasting our time, that we've not made the right choices to succeed. Maybe we don't care. Maybe we're trying to serve a higher authority than merely them. Maybe there are more important things than right. Maybe we have to be humble enough to realize we are like the prodigal's elder brother and try to deal with that, as the Apostle Paul had to do. Maybe we have to realize that being right about things isn't making us good or helping us do good much of the time, and just avoiding doing wrong things certainly isn't. More is required, something that transcends human ethics. I'm not saying it's okay to do wrong. I'm saying there's something better to get on with than just following rules and imitating lifestyles. Maybe we have to separate our faith from an overwhelming truckload of superstition that's been handed down to us. Exchange all the not doing things with doing a few things at least. We grew up being so sure of so many things. How old the earth was, how it got made, which science was wrong, which people were bad people, what happened after we died, what any part of the Bible meant and who wrote it and when, what God thought of gay and trans people, what sex was okay and what was not, what was okay or not to do with money, which cities it was okay to live in and which ones had no affiliated brethren assembly in them, how to vote, trick question, it was not okay to vote, and which movies were okay for us to watch, trick question, it was not okay to watch movies. Stuff like that. We could know, just like Harold Camping. We lived in constant threat of being judged or questioned or criticized about even the most personal things, and the only way to feel safe was to ensure we were doing what everyone else was, and being sure that that was the right way, and that there was only one right way. Well, it's actually pretty hard to give that certainty up, to admit doubt in, to say, as near as I can see, instead of, God says, about a whole lot of things, leaves you feeling vulnerable to criticism and judgment. Every time someone says, what do you do with, or how do you deal with, or rudest of all, how do you get around 1 Corinthians 11:14, I always know exactly what they're doing. They're thinking, without any doubt whatsoever, that my hair is too long for a man, and wondering what makes me think I can just do that without fearing the judgment of God, and why I would expect any Christian to accept me, or respect me, or take me seriously. The verse is clear, isn't it? No doubt about it.
Now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things, and keep the ordinances, as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoureth his head. But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered, dishonoureth her head. For that is even all one as if she were shaven. For if the woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, forsomuch as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither is the man created for the woman, but the woman judging herself, is it comely for a woman to pray unto God uncovered? Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. But if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God.
It's a shame unto me if my hair is long, just as it would be a shame unto a Christian woman if you shaved her head. And so, if she refuses to wear head covering, when praying or prophesying, we are instructed in 1 Corinthians to shave her head. Or possibly, that's rhetoric, or a cultural reference whose meaning is now lost. Either way, we're not doing that bit of the New Testament, or plucking out our right eyes and cutting off our right hands either. Anyway, as trained from childhood, when someone comes at me like that, I go to work. You think my hair is a sin? How long is long? How much of a shame is it? In modern Western culture too, or just in Jewish culture under the Roman Empire? Is it like the men in the Old Testament needing to hide themselves in shame until their beards grew back? Why don't you have a beard? How much does the hair thing matter? Are we really going to shave the heads of women who come to church and pray or prophesy without wearing a head covering, like it clearly says in 1 Corinthians 11? Not clear. But I remember a time when I knew that men couldn't have hair past a certain length, just as I knew women couldn't have short hair or wear trousers. But I just don't know a whole bunch of that stuff anymore. If you gave me the minutes to a 1973 board meeting of a railway company in Spain, there would be a number of similar things I wouldn't know how to interpret, what the intent was, what the context was. It certainly wouldn't arm me with a bunch of things to go around pestering people with. Same thing with 1 Corinthians 11:14 and a bunch of other out-of-context bits of assembly business in the Bible. Stuff about, is the hair thing different from the Bible saying not to plant two different crops in the same field, or not to wear mixed fabrics, or not to eat wieners that might have blood in them? Was the Apostle Paul deciding that black women all needed to have long hair, and old women as well, or their short hair would be a shame unto them? And what did this verse in 1 Corinthians have to do with the men it mentions who got kicked out just like me, but for carrying on a sexual relationship with his father's wife in his case, rather than writing a parody of an outrage pamphlet in mine? Why was it decided to let him back in 2 Corinthians before he was overcome with overmuch sorrow, but I'm to stay out to perpetuity? Was this a Jewish thing or a Christian one? Is the hair thing one of those extremely important issues, or more of a in an ideal world thing? How many other verses in the Bible give information on this topic to help us figure out what is being said? Why are we saying that it's traditional for Jewish men to cover their heads, but it is a shame if we cover ours or even have long hair? If you're sure about exactly what this Bible verse means and exactly what I need to do about it, I've got some other ones to ask you about too. I'm going to tell you something truly shocking that may well open me up to judgment. Just as one time I put a quarter in a slot machine purely to see what gambling felt like, and I neither liked it much nor feel terribly guilty about it, I actually voted once too. And same, didn't become addicted to it, don't feel terribly guilty about it. As near as I can see, there is a God, and I do hope we continue in some way after death, some of us, but I don't go around saying I know it, let alone a bunch of stuff about it. My trust, my faith, my hope is in the life and death of Jesus Christ, having fixed things that needed to get fixed regarding all of that. But I don't know for sure. I just trust and hope. I follow what faith I have. And after the initial naked cold shock of the layers of denial, closedness, and complacency sloughing off, it feels good. It feels better, more serious, more grown up, more real. Marty Solomon of the Bema podcast has another new book coming out, working with Reed Dent, and Instagram tells me that the back says, remember, theology is a human-constructed effort to understand the mysteries of God. We're going to get some things right. We're going to get some things wrong. We're going to need to shift and change and evolve over time and generations. Understood this way, as a posture of curiosity, attention, and wonder, deconstruction is a healthy, expected, and essential part of development. We didn't grow up talking about theology. We called it believing and obeying what the Word of God very clearly says. It took some growing up for me to move beyond that, I can tell you, to see God and the Bible being much less interested in micromanaging our lives, stifling our creativity and self expression, and limiting our options than the leaders in our church group so painfully, clearly needed him to. Apparently, these folks needed that control, demanded it, especially over what they decided the Bible actually said and wanted and meant, quite despite the words on the page often, and what various other bits of it said. And our unceasing church meetings were never about speculating on what this or that part of the Bible meant or how to apply it. They were about us being informed about what the Bible meant. And if two men ever disagreed about what some part of the Bible meant, that might well cause yet another life upending global division. Important not to allow a second opinion, many felt. So there was that. So, like me, you think that there's probably a God. Well, one thing we know, he's not what you think he is. What I think he is either. For you and I, God is mainly a concept we use to define the shape of our own bloated collection of baggage and vanity and superstition. And a big part of what he is a mystery, is beyond our tidy explanations, unable to be fenced in by our questions, not just dad in the sky, not just Big Brother, not just Santa Claus, not just Jupiter.
I know you're not like Santa Claus, although you know who's naughty or nice. I don't say the good or yeah, so give me this. You don't have a sleigh, do you have advice? 'Cause I can't help but wonder, because I just don't understand, and I don't know who you are anymore. I don't even know who I am, but I've been bad all I know you're not like Jupiter. You're more than Zeus in one of his bad moods. But sometimes you help, sometimes you smite. Most times I don't get a reason why, though I don't wish to be rude. So, 'cause I can't help but wonder, 'cause I just don't understand, and I don't know who you are anymore. I don't even know who I am. The cats are bloody, guess I tripped and fell. I know.
A big part of this for me is learning what spiritual humility would even sound like. And it pretty seldom sounds like me saying, God is, like I know for sure. Let me try to tell you about a relic of my upbringing that I'm still saddled with, something I have never moved on from or gotten over. I worry. That's part of who I am. And when I'm worrying about something, has this hard drive with all of my data failed? After those tests, is the doctor going to say I have diabetes? Am I going to have to put my cat down because he stopped eating and many dollars later we can't find what's wrong? Well, I still tend to think in terms of whether God's mad at me or not. I haven't been going to meeting in some time, nor even found a church of my choice that I seem to be able to maintain any mutually supportive connection with the congregants of whatsoever, nor being part of, let alone one, with them. So I pray. I pray to my God that we don't have to put this cat down, but that he's going to start eating and getting better on his own. That the hard drive will not actually have failed, and the result doesn't come back that I have diabetes. And then, when it comes out that, well, that cat seems okay now, but this hard drive with all of my data on it has absolutely failed, and the doctor says, the particular thing about your kind of diabetes is...
Hi, I'm Wilford Brimley, and I've had diabetes for about 20 years. I stay active and I feel pretty good most of the time. See, I do a few simple things now. I'm not perfect, but I try and watch my diet and exercise, and I check my blood sugar. And I get all my diabetic testing supplies from Liberty Medical. If you're 65 or over and on Medicare, call Liberty. They can help you live a better life. Hundreds of thousands of people trust Liberty. They're the nation's leader in home delivery of diabetic testing supplies. Bring everything you need right to your door. Fill out your insurance forms, even bill Medicare or your insurance company, and you pay no money up front. Oh, and they carry all the brands. If you have diabetes, you check your blood sugar and you check it off, and there's no reason not to. And call Liberty. They can help you live a better life.
For more information on free home delivery, call toll-free 1-800-574-4159.
Well, a small part of me wonders if maybe there isn't a God, and this is all just random chance, and there's no being who has an interest in, or hand in, or lesson to be learned from any of this at all. And the bigger part of me wonders if this is him communicating through death and loss and trouble as usual, rather than through love. And I can't seem to shake that. But the famous old traditional, very non-brethren prayer, O Lord, have mercy on me, has frequently expressed my heart of late. Domine misere me, or however people said that in Latin. I was raised never to repeat pre-written prayers by formula, and any dabbling in Latin made people superstitious you might be dabbling in magic, just like in that manual for demon summoning Harry Potter. But this particular prayer really expresses how I feel from time to time. Please, let this admittedly very mundane compared to, say, the work of Jesus cup pass from me. MS, dying cat, car that might be beyond fixing, failed hard drive, and important data lost, woman who doesn't actually love me after all, or maybe who loves a different guy a bit more, diabetes. I want to scream to the heavens, if you need me to experience this, what's going on exactly? What do you want, and how, and why? What are we trying to achieve? How can I handle this well? And then, seemingly, silence. So there's that.
A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Walk into the Wikkid mailbag opening. The Wikkid mailbag. What's in the mailbag today?
Something wicked. Let's look in the Wikkid mailbag.
Samuel writes, I would love to have a conversation about the rapture, but I might get carried away. Jokes, man. Rapture jokes at that. Never thought I'd get caught up in those. Thought I'd left them behind me. He also comments on the sex-related episode. In Unprotected Texts, the Bible's Surprising Contradictions About Sex and Desire by Jennifer Wright Nuts, she argues that the Bible lacks a single consistent sexual ethic and should not be used as a rule book for modern morality. Nust, a Bible scholar and ordained Baptist pastor, demonstrates that biblical views on marriage, desire, and sexual practices are diverse and often contradictory. Nust shows that the Hebrew Bible often takes polygamy, for example, for granted, while the New Testament frequently prioritizes celibacy over marriage to focus on the gospel. The book explores how the Bible portrays desire both as a source of blessing, example in the Song of Songs, and as an evil impulse that requires strict control. Nust contends that since the Bible is not a simple manual, readers have responsibility for their interpretations, judging them by their value, how they serve the community, rather than just their perceived validity. I find it troubling to let go the simple-minded understanding of the Scripture as rulebook, with sex supposedly being the thing most commented upon in said rulebook, and the most important thing discussed among the gathered saints. And I don't think the modern approach to dating, with a period of recreational sex with various people, ends well for most folks in a society either. Seems to end in a whole lot of divorce, broken homes, kids in therapy, people on meds, and a whole lot of people being alone on their phones a whole lot of the time. But I think a lot of what Nust is saying makes sense. does God want us to do and not do on a Saturday night? I am as uncertain about the specifics of that as I am about what specifically God wants us to do or not do on a Sunday morning. It was so much easier to be sure. I guess we'll see how everything turns out. Tracy feels that her late dad, Phil, the returned brethren prodigal, consigned to sitting in the non-members section in the back of the meeting hall with no hope of remarrying either, could maybe have been allowed to help out in some way. It would have been really useful, and it would have meant so much to Phil. She writes, how about helping people? For example, if Dad had an issue with alcohol, well, hey, so does Bob, so get Bob over to Phil for some help. Nope. Pretend no one but those at the back ever did anything wrong. How about offering communion to everyone who wants it and saying a prayer, asking that everyone examine themselves in a genuine way before eating and leave it at that? Nope. The only time anyone is allowed the bread and wine, it is because the meeting standards were met. Subliminally teaching people to please the brethren rather than God. Stick that in your mailbag. Done. One of the most hotly contested issues in our group was who was and who was not allowed to help in any way. I'll never forget some guy getting in some kind of trouble in our meeting and him fearing they'd forbid him sweeping the basement of the meeting hall, which he always proudly, humbly did for no pay. Well, that was it. Season 6 of the Wikkid podcast. Time to go work on my music some more. I'm looking into hiring a professional bass player to make all my songs sound a little more professional. I guess this season leaves me more humble about what I know and don't know, and also about what the various things I still believe are based on. Is there heaven? Is there hell? Is there any kind of continuance after death? And is Jesus Christ a central part of sorting all of that stuff out in the end? I think so, and I guess one day I'll see about all that stuff. Unless, of course, I don't.